Hello friends, this is Laufie, and today I bring you a full breakdown of everything we know so far about Chrono Odyssey, the development studio behind them called Npixel, as well as some rumors and speculations based on a couple sources. Chrono Odyssey is an MMORPG that took the community by storm with its recent gameplay trailer that many have described to look too good to be true. The game was announced in late 2020, at which time the timeline for the game was to begin testing in 2021, with the goal of a launch in 2023. But considering that there has been no known public testing of the game, the chances of a 2023 launch are pretty slim, so don't get too excited. This tweet from the official Twitter indicates that there is no mobile version planned. The game is developed in Unreal Engine 5, which is what the game owes part of those unbelievable visuals to. The development team is named Npixel, who are known for creating mobile games with NFT integration, but I can immediately put your hearts at ease with several tweets from the official Chrono Odyssey Twitter indicating that the game is purely Web 2 based, so it will not be blockchain based with any NFTs or anything like that. Just your regular run-of-the-mill MMO, brother. When doing these informative videos, I typically prefer to split them into 7 specific sections: classes and combat, customization, monetization, endgame, developer communication, world and story, and fine details. However, due to a complete and entire lack of information, I am forced to drop the monetization section, as anything said about it online at the moment is pure speculation, so I don't have any hard facts to present you with. Some of these sections will be a little bit more barren than others due to lack of information, but I will do my best. Let's get into it. Number 1. Classes and combat. Chrono Odyssey features a smooth, true action combat with your expected functionality like dodging and blocking. From what I've gathered from the gameplay trailer, the dodge does seem to be a true iframe, so you won't only use it to get out of attacks, but to avoid the attack CC and damage without having to move out of its range, granted that you time it perfectly. Some classes in the game are able to block attacks as well, and the block does seem to have a cap on the amount of damage it can tank before your character becomes overwhelmed and gets knocked back in a long CC and probably some damage too. In a recent official developer press release from Samuel Seo, he emphasized seamless weapon swapping in the middle of combat. However, this doesn't quite have as much freedom as New World, for example, but more on that in a second. This is unconfirmed, but from rewatching the gameplay trailer 100 times, it seems that the game is very likely to employ the Holy Trinity. Things have a very obvious presence in the trailer, as in any group content we can see the boss almost always facing either a class with a shield. Moreover, in some clips of group content we can see a golden kind of magical effects being used, and they are seen exclusively on the Sorcerer class and the Paladin class, which both sound like the types of names that could have support specs. Unfortunately, at no point in the gameplay trailer does Npixel show us what the UI looks like, so that leaves me very curious as to how they would handle healing combat in the game, granted that it is present in the game. Healing in action combat is a task that is extremely difficult to tackle, as I've seen previously with games like Revelation Online and Bless Online, God forgive me. Healers were basically so clunky and almost dysfunctional in terms of action combat that they were forced to switch to the tap target option just for them to become actually usable. I think the only game that I can bring up that I think did healing in action combat in the most perfect way I can think of is Terra Online. I absolutely loved healing in Terra, so if there is actually healing in Chrono Odyssey with its action combat, I really hope that it's handled similarly to how Terra did it. One very unique thing about the combat in Chrono Odyssey is the Chronotector, a stopwatch that every player possesses that they can use to stop or rewind time. Samuel Seo emphasizes the importance of this artifact, as it will be integral to both the story of the game and our regular combat encounters. The website describes the Chronotector as a powerful artifact said to have been created by a mysterious ancient civilization only known as the Great Ones. It holds the power to warp and manipulate space-time to the holder's will. Though it has lost much of its original strength, it is still capable of twisting time and space to create effects irreplaceable by even the world's most powerful magic. Interestingly, despite the Chronotector being emphasized as a core part of both gameplay and story, I'm very curious to see what the possibilities really are. At some point in the video, we see a huge open world fight with 25 to 30 people involved, so I'm wondering how can the Chronotector be used in that. We've seen the trailer preview the ability of the Chronotector to stop time not just for yourself, but for the mobs around you. So I'm curious to see how that will function in the open world raid where there's a lot of people involved, because I really hope that as you're fighting the boss and it's just about to die, I hope that some bozo can't use the Chronotector to just restore 10% of the boss's health, effectively clock blocking you from clearing it. However, the mechanic does look really cool and unique to me, and it makes the MMOs stand out among the grey mass of other MMORPGs that are heavily cookie cutter and don't actually have anything that creative in it, so I'm excited to see how it works. Now let's look at the classes more closely. Samuel Serra revealed to us that Chrono Odyssey will have 6 distinct classes: Assassin, Berserker, Paladin, Ranger, Sorcerer, and Swordsman. I'm happy to tell you that there will be no gender lock for these classes, as it has both been confirmed by Samuel Serra himself, and we can see this for ourselves from the trailer. When I first watched the trailer, I was a little bit confused because we were given a distinct 6 classes. There's 2 different sword wielders, 2 different dagger wielders, there's a spear guy, a paladin guy, a girl with a rapier, and someone straight up using a book. Considering that we can swap classes, I am assuming that the way it works is that you are limited to an amount of certain weapons to switch between within your own class archetype, much like Guild Wars 2 versus something very free like New World. And from what I've seen in the trailer, I've kind of surmised that the choices of these weapons for the specific classes are as follows. Assassin seems to use the daggers and rifle, as we can clearly see here. Berserker is an axe wielder, whether it's a dual axe stance probably for damage, and a two-handed axe for tanking. Paladin uses a mace and shield as well as a spear, and the spear seems to be the healing one, as it's the one that has the glowy golden effects that I mentioned a bit earlier. Ranger uses a bow, obviously, and the rapier, which is the conclusion that I've reached purely based on the process of elimination, because the rapier weapon is shown very briefly in the trailer for just a couple seconds. Sorceress uses a staff for damage and a spellbook for healing, probably, because of the same golden glow on its skills. Lastly, the swordsman uses a sword and a shield for tanking, and a two-handed greatsword for damage. Personally, I didn't notice the paladin in a position of tanking in front of the boss in the trailer, and I think that would make sense because I feel like it's a bit risky to create a class that's limited to only healing and tanking. Granted, that is if the classes work the way I'm assuming they do. Regardless, the class system looks quite unique so far. Now, despite popular belief, I don't actually use ChatGPT to write my video scripts. However, what I did use it for this time for this video is I asked it to give me any leaks or speculation that it could find in regards to Chrono Odyssey, and it actually gave me an answer. However, before I tell you what the answer was, keep in mind that a lot of the time these people who claim to have insider information are full of shit, and also at the same time, ChatGPT only has information up to September 2021, and it doesn't have live access to the internet on the spot. Whatever answer it gave me is purely for fun speculation and nothing beyond that. When I asked it this question, ChatGPT told me there was a Reddit thread that has now been deleted, so I can't physically show it to you, where a user claimed to have insider info about the game. Of course. Again, just to emphasize, this is probably cap, but the user mentions that the game will have skill trees that you can utilize to create different builds. The way it sounded to me is that each weapon for your class will have a multitude of skills for you to choose from and evolve them, kind of like Lost Ark, and any mention of versatility and choice is music to my ears. Also, what the Reddit user has mentioned in that thread, along with a couple other sources that are just as questionable, is that there will be some sort of rune system that will allow you to customize your skills and abilities even further. This all sounds great, but once again, ChatGPT only has information from 2021 and before that, so not only are these trust me bro sources, even if they were true, they are extremely outdated at this point in time. So please take all of this information with a spoonful of salt. It's really fun to speculate and kind of wonder about games that are upcoming that we don't know much information about, so that's why I'm including these in the video, but I really need to drive the point home that these are just speculations based on sources that have no ground to stand on. During my research, I came across a few Twitter accounts that belonged to the official concept artists of Chrono Odyssey, and they showcased some beautiful artwork. One of the concept artists posted a few sketches of potential classes of Chrono Odyssey that had the tag Chrono Odyssey on it, and we can actually account the classes that we can see in the trailer and link them to some of these images. So I will show them to you now because it also has some classes that didn't quite make it, whether it's into the game or into the trailer. So these are actually potential classes that we might see in the future in the game. In this first one, we can see the Ranger clearly on the right. but the person at the top of the image seems to have some kind of a dragon spirit. To me, this looks like a potential martial artist class. At the bottom, we can see a man with sharp blades attached to long chains, which could potentially mean a mid-range blade class that will probably have a lot of AoE, as indicated by this wonderful tiny drawing here. Reminds me a little of Reaper on Terra. Oops, wrong image. Meant to put this one. It was hardly any better. Anyway, in the next image, I think that the top left class is the assassin, and the one in the middle is most likely a sorceress. However, the lady on the right is also something we didn't see in the trailer, which seems to be a sharp blade melee class, except her blades are on her feet, reminiscent of Bouncer in PSO2. We can see in this wonderful preview that the artist had the vision of a class with a lot of flips to attack the enemy. Personally, I think this is a really cool idea. In this image, the lady at the bottom probably accounts for an early iteration of the paladin, because the flag could be a spear, I think she's throwing her shield away, and she's pretty heavily armor clad. The man on the right is probably the swordsman, as we can see him possibly spinning his shield to reflect a projectile while holding a greatsword behind him. The class on the top left is the one that's unaccounted for, a woman holding a small dagger in one hand and a long whip in another. Lastly, in this image, all the way on the right side, we can probably see the early iteration of the rapier, and possibly another sorceress right next to him. However, on the left side, we can see a man using a murder of crows as a weapon, which honestly, if this was in the game, I'd be heavily inclined to play it solely based on that. And at the bottom we see a girl, first of all, in bunny ears for some reason, but she's holding a two-hand warglaive of Azeroth, so I'm a little disappointed this one doesn't seem to have made it into the game, because I feel like Asmongold would have really enjoyed this one. Number 2. Customization. Sadly, the trailer didn't give us a taste of the character creation, as it was more focused on the gameplay, but honestly, considering it's a brand new Korean MMORPG, I'm not too worried. As mentioned before, the classes have no gender lock. However, I am not sure about the possible existence of playable races. The playable characters in the trailer all seem to be humanoid, but we know there are elf-like characters in the game, both from the trailer and some of the concept art. So I'm not sure if this means that some or all classes will also have that option available to them as well. In the press release, Samuel Sell mentions that we can customize our characters in many ways, so I'm more than certain this game will have skins, but again, no previews of those yet. As mentioned before, Chrono Odyssey is an MMORPG that's being developed in Unreal Engine 5, and Endpixel is a Korean MMORPG development company. So I am not too worried about skins being present in the game, nor for them to look good, because historically, those guys know how to make cool skins. One thing I can show you though is some gorgeous concept art from various concept artists who worked on the art for Chrono Odyssey, so we can at least get a taste for what the gear and possibly some of the costumes will look like. Some of this art could be of major NPCs in the story, but at the very least, this will give you a little taste of the general aesthetic of the game when it comes to gear and possibly costumes in the future. As with most MMORPGs, I do not expect them to maintain immersion with future skins, so at some point, this mysterious world will have a legion of maids and swimsuit models unleashed upon it. I'm sure of it. Number 3. Endgame. The press release didn't shed too much light on what kind of endgame we will have and whether it will be more instanced or open world oriented, but from the trailer we can gather a few things. Firstly, and most obviously, the existence of massive open world bosses like Eltanius. The scene is also the one that gave players the most concern, as it does seem to be in the open world of a massive game on Unreal 5 with over 25 people all hitting the boss at the same time, with all particle effects enabled at max graphics. I feel like I should speak quieter when I'm reading the sentence, because if my GPU hears this, it's gonna melt ahead of time, so it doesn't have to deal with this. Aside from this massive Pokemon, I want to say that we most likely will have instanced content, which is an assumption I am making from this Archer clip right here that seems to be in a very enclosed area, as well as this part at the end of the trailer where a party of players is seen opening a door so they can fight Diablo in a pretty small secluded place as well. As a side note, from this scene, assuming it's an instance, it seems that Chrono Odyssey's dungeon content will have a party size of 5. There seems to be existence of smaller open world bosses as well, unless this area is also an instance just created to look like a forest. In the press release, Samuel Seo shares that among other things, players will be competing for dominance against factions. So this is also leading me to heavily speculate that we will have either free open world PvP or PvP zones, or perhaps faction versus faction sieges. Sounds pretty cool and all, but imagining a fucking siege with 60 players on each side in this game makes me terrified for my own PC. More on factions later. One thing I can add as well that comes from those questionable sources that I've mentioned before is that they listed that Chrono Odyssey is supposed to have a very fleshed out crafting and gathering system. So if this holds true, we can expect gathering and crafting professions to be quite important for the endgame, possibly even having the key to craft your best gear. And personally, I would really like that, because with how beautiful the world of Chrono Odyssey looks, at least from this trailer, I would welcome any and all excuses to go outside and kind of explore the world as much as I can. Moreover, here's a small tidbit. I found concept art of the various blacksmiths from a tweet posted by one of the Chrono Odyssey's concept artists right here. Number 4. Dev communication. Now, there hasn't been much communication directly from the developers in the past few years, bar the initial announcement and the recent press release. This was already referenced in the video several times, but it doesn't go into great details about the game yet. Not that big of a deal for me personally, because even though I would love to find out more details, I understand the secrecy around the specifics of the game while it's still in development. You don't want to share an idea that ends up getting scrapped, right? There also recently was a tweet from Bongon Bay, the CEO of Npixel, that he posted and pinned to his profile on May 3rd, in which he says, "From now on, we will communicate with users around the world and complete the game. Please show a lot of interest." The wording of this tweet is a little bit vague, so I'm not sure if he means that he will have direct communication with specific players and streamers and have those kinds of things prepared, or if he means, which is more likely, that they're just going to have more teasers and more information coming out on their social media platforms in the near or far future. Whichever one that is, I'm really excited to see what they've prepared for us. Number 5. World and story.
Without fail, the final moment comes when you least expect it, in ways that are not foreseen. When nothing is right, when all is lost, the most vulnerable are stripped of all they possess. Perhaps just a misfortune and a belief that life will always deliver a fair trial.
The setting of Chrono Odyssey takes place in the world of Cetera. As mentioned before, I found a ton of really cool looking concept art on Twitter from official concept artists that worked on Chrono Odyssey, so allow me to read you a passage of the lore of the game while I preview these concept art pieces to you. Cetera is a land full of unexplored regions, with rewards and riches yet unknown. Let your courage carry you to new regions as you face formidable foes. With your newly acquired control over space-time and the alliances you form throughout your journeys, you may just yet conquer the lands you discover. There is no one way through this world filled with opportunity, born from the chaos of warping space-time. Welcome to Cetera. The adventure is yours to be had. Explore the endless world of Cetera and find your own way to survive. The world of Cetera is split into 5 factions. Keep in mind, not all of these may be player factions specifically, as some of them are factions of evil we are repeatedly shown to be fighting against in the trailer. The Guardians are greater beings that oversee all of Cetera and those who follow them. They vary greatly as they are not originally from this world. The Great Ones called upon them after each of their own worlds was destroyed by the Void, another faction. Due to their past, they view the contaminated World Movers, which is also another faction, as a severe threat. To them, the World Movers are unwelcome guests that must be eliminated. Since there is a mention that the Guardians overlook people who follow them, I am kind of assuming that players may be able to join this faction. The Void is the realization of nothingness and the cruel abyss. No one understands anything about the Void, with the exception of their ultimate goal, the complete annihilation. Powerful members of the Void are essentially immortal and wield unfathomable strength. Cetera itself rejects their existence, effectively limiting their powers. You are the world's final hope. This last line of text makes me assume that this isn't one of the factions that you can join. This is a faction of the world and the lore that we are actively fighting against, whichever other faction would decide to join. This seems to be the biggest, most powerful evil at the core of the antagonist of the universe of the game. Really unfortunate because these guys look really cool, but moving on. The Broken are former world movers whose bodies have succumbed to their void contamination, which is extremely unstable once absorbed by the body, causing seizures and eventual breakdowns of bodily functions. Once the contamination reaches this point, the body completely breaks down, rendering its owner neither dead nor alive. The Broken completely lose their sense of self and blindly attack any living being in an attempt to restore the energy that they have lost. It's the undead. They're undead, and their leader kind of looks like Sylvanas if her look actually reflected how crazy she is. Anyway, this doesn't sound like a player faction to me. The Outcasts are an armed band of ostracized world movers. They were all ousted due to conflicts between factions or completely immoral acts. Oh, so the world movers are like Twitch and the Outcasts are like Kick? Sorry. Their humanity makes it easier for them to lay low, disguise themselves, and target and scam the world movers. The danger they pose is completely different from that of your other enemies. Finally, the world movers are the survivors of the void's destruction of their homes. All are blessed with strength and luck that allowed them to overcome challenges and powerful foes. They have split up into 3 separate factions, each of them having a goal of survival and prosperity of the world movers, and as such they work together towards their common goal. There is, however, a fierce competition between them for influence, rights, and their own interests. So wait, let me figure this out for a second. The Guardians have been destroyed by the Void, but for some reason they have beef with the World Movers, who also got destroyed by the Void. The World Movers naturally have beef with the Void, which makes more sense, but instead of banding together completely, they fracture into 3 factions that all have friendly beef with each other, which I'm sure doesn't really help the situation considering they're constantly being targeted by the Outcasts, who used to be world movers but are just shitty people who are looking for their own interests. On top of it all, some of the world movers get corrupted by the Void, which turns them into the Broken, who have mindless beef with everybody, and the Void wants to destroy absolutely everything in sight. World movers have it rough, man. This world is a mess. Now, going back to the questionable sources that ChatGPT graciously provided me with, they do also mention that the chronotector will allow us to travel in space-time, visiting different time periods. And honestly, this is something I could believe considering how important the chronotractor is to the core of the game's lore and story. Even more importantly, there is a part in the old announcement trailer 2 years ago where the camera zooms in on one part of the chronotector, where we can see a moment frozen in stone, and it transitions to show a real scene of a boss. This boss is actually someone we can fight, as seen from the recent gameplay trailer. My assumption is this is NPixel's very creative way to approach re-clears. Why am I going back and refighting Belshazzar, the Lich King, Alexander Prime, Chandra Manea every single week? Maybe in Chrono Odyssey, our re-clears are just us rewinding time back to fight the enemy once again to get that weekly loot. This is just my speculation, but I think this would be a really creative way of making re-clears a little bit less immersion breaking. Regardless of that, Chronotector is a really unique part of the game, and if it's just something that we see in the lore and we're only able to travel between different parts of the story, that's still pretty cool. Number 6. Extras. Just a few small bits of information I thought were interesting that didn't really fall under any specific category. First of all, I wanted to quickly mention that the score for Chrono Odyssey is created by Chris Velasco, who composed music for God of War, StarCraft, and Overwatch. As much as I don't like going back to these trust me bro sources for speculation, this one is probably the one that I wish to be true the most, and it mentions that Chrono Odyssey will have player housing. I always love horizontal aspects of the game like that are focused more on social aspects and having things to do for fun or to just mess around with. I also found this concept art of something that looks like a wine cellar from one of NPixel artists who worked on Chrono Odyssey. Obviously, this can be quite literally anything. A tavern, a dungeon, a random NPC house, so this isn't proof of anything by any means. I can't tell you anything beyond that mention from the Reddit user who claimed to have insider info. And I can't even show you the thread anymore because it's been gone for a long time. So once again, take this with a ladle of salt because no official source has mentioned housing. But I really hope this will be a feature. This one is just my speculation, but I hope the game has a sailing system as well, because riding a scuffed clipper with the boys across the sea to make some scratch was the highlight of my arcade experience. Aside from this official concept art, we also have a small sailing clip in the trailer. Chances are it's just a cutscene of our character arriving in a major city, but a girl can dream. And there you go. This is all the information I could gather in my research about Chrono Odyssey. I tried to be as clear as possible when I'm talking about speculation or rumors, so please don't take any of the speculative parts of this video as fact. It's always fun to wonder what a beautiful looking game like this has in store for us, but the best thing to do is always to wait for official word from the developers, so hopefully that comes soon. Many players are understandably skeptical about how likely the game is to look this good, which I think is perfectly valid. We are jaded MMORPG players, so we are no strangers to hearing big promises and getting something that's nothing like it. Sometimes the MMORPG genre reminds me of microwave meals, with how nice the food looks on the box until you actually open it yourself. However, despite that, I always try to balance skepticism with a healthy amount of hopefulness. I am excited to see what NPixel have prepared with Chrono Odyssey, and if the game really is a lot like the trailer, the game will be a full-fledged 5-course meal. I am a huge MMORPG fan myself, so I will be streaming Chrono Odyssey as soon as I am able to in the near or far future. So come join me on my Twitch at twitch.tv/LaufieLOL. I stream every day except Tuesday. I currently stream Lost Ark while I wait for Blue Protocol, while I wait for Perfect New World, while I wait for Throne and Liberty. I will try anything once, regardless of what my opinions on it are. Come hang out, and I would love to hear your thoughts about the game as well. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.